Why did the room fall silent the moment she walked in? Elena Vasquez had been through enough combat zones to know when she was being measured. And when the measurements weren't in her favor, the air inside the briefing room at the classified Syrian outpost felt heavier than the August heat outside. 8 men sat around the scuffed table, their postures loose, but their eyes locked on her like apex predators, deciding whether the newcomer was prey or just a distraction before the real hunt. She recognized the insignia before she met their eyes. SEAL Team 7, the platoon every operator either respected, feared, or quietly avoided. Their leader, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Ghost Kellerman, barely glanced up from the tactical maps in front of him. His ice blue gaze swept over her ID, lingered on the line, confirming she was a hospital corpsman, then returned to the map with a flat, dismissive tone. "We requested Rodriguez back," he said. It wasn't just a statement. It was a verdict. Her jaw tightened. She knew the man he meant. Chief Petty Officer Miguel Rodriguez. 3 tours, 2 Purple Hearts, and a reputation for dragging SEALs out of situations so bad they never talked about them afterward. He'd gone home with shrapnel in his spine, impossible boots to fill, and every man in this room knew it. A quick scan told her more than they intended. Chief Hayes, the team's senior enlisted, wore a fresh scar running from temple to jaw. The kind that left you lucky to be alive. Collins, the youngest, flexed his right hand without thinking. Testing tendons Rodriguez had reattached under fire. Morrison, the cum specialist, avoided her eyes entirely, as though acknowledging her might feel like betraying someone. They weren't just looking at a replacement medic. They were assessing a liability, a woman in their tight circle, an outsider who might cost them more than she could save. Rodriguez set a high bar. She said evenly, holding Kellerman's stare, "I'm not here to replace him. I'm here to keep you all breathing long enough to get home to your families." It wasn't bravado. It wasn't a sales pitch. Just a statement of fact from someone who'd zipped up enough body bags to understand the real stakes. The silence stretched until Morrison broke it with a low chuckle. "Well, at least she's not trying to blow sunshine up our asses about being the best medic in the Navy." A few reluctant smiles flickered. The ice cracked, but didn't break. The first week felt like a constant tightrope walk between proving competence and refusing to be baited. In the field, she demonstrated the kind of precision you only get from treating actual casualties under actual fire. During conditioning runs, Hayes deliberately pushed the pace in the Syrian heat. She matched him step for step without complaint, breath steady, sweat soaking through her uniform. When Collins dropped a crude remark during a briefing, she sent it back with a comeback so quick and sharp that even Kellerman's mouth twitched upward. But trust in a unit like this wasn't built in public moments. It came from quiet ones. That Friday night, Collins stumbled into the aid station at 0200, a cut above his left eye, swollen knuckles. The kind of bruising that didn't come from equipment malfunction. Though that was the story, he muttered. The air reeked of alcohol and cheap perfume. By the book, she should have reported it. Discipline meant safety in the field. Safety meant survival, and survival was her job. But she'd grown up in East LA, daughter of a mother who worked 3 jobs and still had to negotiate with people whose rules weren't written down. She recognized the unspoken code when she saw it. Equipment malfunction, huh? She said, cleaning the wound with deliberate care. "Yeah," he said carefully. "Real defective piece of gear. Won't happen again." Her stitches were neat, precise, designed to minimize scarring. "Equipment malfunctions can be dangerous," she said, writing notes that backed his story, especially when they involve blunt force trauma to the orbital region. "I'd avoid that particular piece of equipment in the future." The relief in his eyes wasn't gratitude for the stitches. It was for her choice not to end his career in a report. Word traveled fast. By the end of week 2, the way they looked and her had shifted, almost imperceptibly. Kellerman still studied her like a problem he hadn't solved yet, but now there was curiosity in the mix. The first real test didn't come in training. It came in Al-Hasaka. The insertion was clean. 8 shadows moving through darkness toward what intel promised was a likely defended weapons cache in an abandoned textile factory. Maybe 2 guards routine. What they found instead was a staging area crawling with at least 30 fighters, Iranian-backed militia. Military precision in their movements, unloading crates, establishing firing lanes. Not insurgent chaos. Coordinated. Force were aborting. Kellerman ordered calmly over comms. Collect what intel we can and get out clean. They didn't make it 30 meters. The explosion that trapped them wasn't random. Half the building they'd been using for observation collapsed in a roar of dust and concrete. Someone had been watching them watch. And now fighters were closing in from every direction. Bullets shredded masonry inches from her head. Rodriguez, not the old corpsman, but the comms guy, was down. Blood pumping from a leg wound that made her stomach clench. Femoral artery. No time to think. Just pressure. Tourniquet. IV. Stay with me, Rodriguez, she said. Voice steady though her pulse was a drumbeat in her ears. Hayes went down next. Shrapnel tearing through his right shoulder. His shooting arm. His life's work hanging useless at his side. The frustration in his eyes burned hotter than the pain. Kellerman's voice came over comms, tight with urgency. This is Go 7. We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions. 2 urgent surgical. Need dust off now. Nearest support is 20 minutes. Came the reply. 20 minutes. An eternity, and then she saw it. The shift in enemy fire, not suppression. Coordination. A sniper. Somewhere high, keeping them pinned. Every movement forced back into cover. Collins spotted the glint. A mosque's minaret, 400 meters away. A sniper and his spotter. Eliminating them one by one. The assault was minutes away from breaking through. Boots on the stairwell below, glass shattering at ground level. Vasquez. Kellerman's voice cut through the chaos as he crawled to her position. I need you to take Hayes' rifle. She blinked, thinking she'd misheard. That's sniper's. The key, take out his spotter. Then him. 30 seconds, maybe less. The Barrett M8-201 lay beside Hayes like a weapon from another world. 30 pounds of steel, recoil that could dislocate a shoulder. A weapon meant to disable vehicles. Not. This, she'd grown up hunting mule deer with her grandfather. She'd qualified expert at boot camp, but this wasn't paper or venison. This was a trained killer with a perfect line of sight, and she'd have one chance. Hayes tried to argue, but Kellerman shut it down. Vasquez has the steadiest hands here, best eyes. If anyone can make this shot, it's her. She settled into the rubble, scope trained on the minaret. The spotter came into focus first, bearded, binoculars raised, feeding targets to the sniper beside him. Her grandfather's voice floated back to her. Shooting is just surgery at a distance. Same steady hands, same breathing, same focus, her. First shot hit the wall 6 inches wide. The sniper swung his scope toward her position. She chambered another round without thinking. The second shot dropped the spotter, a red mist against white stone. The sniper turned too late. Her third shot punched through the balustrade and ended him, and for a moment there was silence. The ringing in her ears faded just enough for her to hear the change in the battle's rhythm. Without their overwatch, the fighters outside moved less like hunters and more like prey caught in open ground. But the relief was short-lived. The building still trembled with incoming fire, and the final push was already on its way up the stairwell. Vasquez stayed prone, scanning the courtyard through the Barrett scope. The absence of the sniper had cracked their coordination, but it hadn't broken it entirely. A PKM machine. Gun barked from the second floor of a building across the open space, its heavy rounds raking the side of their position and forcing Morrison and Collins back behind cover. She shifted, adjusting for the sandbag wall shielding the gunner. Breath, pause, squeeze. The .50 caliber round tore through the bags and through the man behind them, dropping the weapon silent in mid-burst. "P comes down," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "Copy." Kellerman's voice snapped back, sharper now, energized by the opening. "Morrison, Collins, move to the west side. Cover our approach." Another target appeared in the edge of her scope, a mortar team setting up on a nearby rooftop. She didn't think. She just worked the bolt, found her sight picture, and put a round through the gunner before he could drop the first shell. The assistant froze, his hands shaking, then scrambled out of sight. The sky thumped with the sound of approaching rotors. Faint, still distant, extraction birds inbound. But not yet close enough to save them if the enemy decided on one last coordinated rush. She pulled away from the rifle long enough to check on Hayes. He was pale but still conscious, the pressure bandage holding. "Don't get too comfortable," she told him, forcing a note of levity into her voice. "Your rifle's earning its keep." Hayes managed to grin through clenched teeth. "Remind me never to bet against you, Doc." Through the dust and haze, Kellerman moved like a shadow, coordinating movements, redirecting fire, keeping their perimeter intact. The man seemed incapable of panic, but when his eyes met hers again, there was something there. Not surprise exactly, but the recognition of a decision paying off. The first helicopter broke over the horizon, skimming low. Its side guns opened up on a cluster of militia fighters pushing toward the building's eastern flank, scattering them into alleys and doorways. The second bird flared behind it, its downdraft whipping dust and debris into the air. "Move!" Kellerman barked. "Morrison, take Rodriguez. Collins, you're with Hayes. Go, go, go." Vasquez slung the Barrett across her back, absurdly heavy now that the adrenaline was ebbing, and grabbed her med kit. She and Kellerman brought up the rear, firing short bursts to keep heads down as they moved through the shattered doorway and into the chaos outside. The open stretch to the LZ was only 50 meters, but it felt like a mile. Fighters popped from cover, firing wildly. The SEALs returned fire in disciplined bursts, covering one another in a lethal dance they'd perfected over years. Vasquez kept her head low, aware of every grain of dust that clung to her sweat, every heartbeat hammering in her ears. The extraction crew hauled Rodriguez and Hayes aboard. First, she followed, hands already on 4 lines, checking vitals, ignoring the ache in her shoulder where the Barrett's recoil had left a deep bruise. Kellerman was last in, signaling the pilots the moment his boots cleared the skid. The helicopter lifted, banking hard away from the kill zone. The sound of gunfire faded beneath the engine's roar. For the first time since the building collapsed, she let herself exhale. The flight back blurred into a sequence of muscle memory. Stabilize, monitor, adjust. Her hands moved automatically while her mind replayed the shots. The moment the spotter fell, the sudden stillness in the sniper's scope. The knowledge that without those seconds of clarity, the men strapped into this aircraft wouldn't be breathing right now. The base's landing pad was already prepped for casualties. Med teams swarmed Hayes and Rodriguez the moment the skids touched. Vasquez climbed down after them, the Barrett still across her back, its weight both alien and familiar now. The debrief was clinical. Kellerman's after-action report was stripped of drama, each line a factual record. Corpsman Vasquez eliminated 3 high-value targets at extended range under extreme combat conditions. Directly enabled team extraction. Prevented catastrophic tactical outcome, but the glances from the rest of the team told a different story. Morrison nod, Collins's lopsided grin, Hayes' quiet thanks as they wheeled him toward surgery. Trust earned, not in weeks of training, but in seconds when there was no other choice. Later, in the stillness of her quarters, she sat on the edge of her cot and unwrapped her shoulder. The recoil bruise was deep purple, spreading across her skin like spilled ink. She pressed her fingers to it, feeling the dull ache, and thought about her grandfather's voice again. Same steady hands, same breathing, same focus. It wasn't killing that stayed with her. It was the moment before each shot. When the world narrowed to the weight of the rifle, the air in her lungs, the certainty that missing was not an option. That, and the way Kellerman had looked at her afterward, not as a medic, not as a woman, but as someone who had stepped into a role nobody expected her to fill and made it hers. By the next morning, word had spread beyond the team in the chow hall. Operators she didn't know gave her the kind of silent acknowledgement usually reserved for veterans of their own. Circle. Not friendly, not warm, but something deeper. Recognition. She tried to push it aside. There was still work to do. Patients to check. Gear to inventory. But the knock on her door that evening pulled her back into the gravity of what had happened. Master. Chief Sarah Chun stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Chun's reputation preceded her. The kind of quiet legend who'd served everywhere without leaving a trace, except in the stories whispered by those who'd been there. The Special Operations Combat Medic Program is looking for candidates, Chun said without preamble. Your name's at the top of the list. Vasquez blinked. SOCM. It's a 2-year pipeline. Assignments with any unit. SEALs, Delta, Rangers. The washout rate's brutal. But for those who make it, you operate at their level. Full medical authority in the field. Advanced trauma. Tactics, weapons, everything. You'll need to keep the most dangerous people alive in the most dangerous places. Vasquez leaned back, processing. And why me? Chun set a folder on the table. Because what you did yesterday isn't standard. A medic taking out enemy snipers with a 50 cal isn't in the manual. But you kept calm under fire, prioritized, and saw the bigger picture. Those are leadership instincts. Can't be taught. The folder was heavy with paperwork. Somewhere inside, she knew, was the Silver Star recommendation Chun hadn't mentioned yet. But before she could ask, there was another knock. Kellerman stepped in, still in dusty fatigues, carrying 2 steaming mugs. He handed one to her, then sat without invitation. I've been thinking about that moment, he said quietly, handing you Hayes' rifle. You know why I did it? Vasquez shook her head. It wasn't your scores or your hunting stories, he said. It was the way you worked on Hayes and Rodriguez while everything was going to hell. Calm, focused. You saw the whole board. That's what made me trust you with the shot. She didn't respond right away. The coffee was strong, bitter, grounding. Kellerman leaned forward. If you take the SOCM path, you're not just learning to save lives. You're learning to make decisions that decide who. Lives at all. And once you can do that, you can stand anywhere in this world and know you belong there. He left without waiting for her answer. That night, she didn't sleep. Not because of the firefight replaying in her mind, but because she could still feel the Barrett's weight in her hands and the responsibility that had come with it. How far could you push yourself before something inside broke? That was the unspoken question in every evolution of the Special Operations Combat Medic course. And on day 1, Vasquez learned there were no right answers, only the ones you could live with when the instructors stopped watching. Fort Bragg's August heat was nothing like Syria's dry furnace. This was wet heat, clinging to skin, soaking through gear until you felt heavier just by breathing. The first week blurred into a constant cycle of physical drills. Weapons familiarization and medical scenarios so realistic they left even seasoned operators pale. 32 candidates had started. By the end of week 2, 5 were gone. Injuries, voluntary withdrawals, one silent resignation after an instructor read his pulse during a stress test and told him to pack his gear. Vasquez learned quickly that here, her gender was neither a shield nor a weapon. She was simply one more body to break, and the instructors tried. 18-hour days layered trauma simulations on top of small unit tactics until muscle memory blurred. With mental fatigue, she ran casualty evacuation drills at midnight, dragging 200-pound dummies through mud, while instructors screamed to keep her head down. She learned to intubate under blackout conditions, to perform surgical procedures in less time than it took to load a rifle magazine, to shoot on the move while calculating wind and distance in her head. And still, Sirius stayed with her. Sometimes it was in her dreams, the white stone of the minaret, the bearded spotter raising binoculars, the sudden stillness after the shot. Other times, it came in moments of quiet, when her hands were steady over a simulated chest wound, and she realized she'd used the same breathing pattern she'd used behind the Barrett. On day 19, they dropped them in the woods with a map, a compass, and orders to rendezvous 20 miles away before sunrise. No food, no sleep, just movement. By midnight, blisters had opened on both her heels, and one candidate had rolled an ankle so badly he was limping on a makeshift crutch. Vasquez ended up at the front of the staggered column, navigating by moonlight. It reminded her of hunting trips with her grandfather in New Mexico, how he'd made her lead the way back to camp even when she was 12, forcing her to trust her own sense of direction. "The woods will lie to you," he'd said. "You have to know the truth before they do." They made the rendezvous with 30 minutes to spare. She dropped her ruck in the dew-soaked grass and sat down hard, her legs trembling with exhaustion. The instructors didn't praise. They never did. But the absence of critique was its own reward. The next month was worse. The scenarios blurred the line between medicine and combat until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. In one drill, she had to stabilize a wounded teammate while incoming rounds cracked overhead. Sim rounds, but close enough to feel real. In another, she was given a casualty with catastrophic injuries and a timer set for 12 minutes. Too long spent on any one intervention, and the instructors would mark the patient as dead. It was in those moments she understood what Kellerman had meant. SOCM wasn't about being the best medic. It was about deciding which life to save when you couldn't save them all, and living with that choice afterward. By the end of Phase 1, 15 candidates remained. She was one of only 2 women, the other a quiet Air Force PJ who could run for miles without changing her breathing. They rarely spoke during training, but when they passed each other in the hall, there was a flicker of recognition, an understanding of what it meant to be here when so many thought you wouldn't last. The Syrian firefight became a touchstone in the mental resilience sessions, when the psychologist pressed her to describe a moment under pressure. She spoke about prioritizing care for Rodriguez and Hayes, about keeping calm with a sniper targeting their position. She left out the feeling of the Barrett's recoil, the way the spotter's body had dropped out of her scope. That was hers alone. The physical toll mounted, her hands, once smooth enough to place stitches that left but barely a scar, were now lined with calluses. Her knuckles were perpetually bruised from weapons drills. Sleep was measured in 90-minute increments, if it came at all, and yet, every time she thought she was near the edge, she remembered that day in Syria, the smell of dust, the taste of grit, Kellerman's voice saying, "If anyone can make this shot, it's her." Midway through the pipeline, they were flown to a desert training site for live fire scenarios. Here, the distances were real, the rifles heavier, the heat almost identical to the Syrian outpost. It was supposed to be another medic exercise. Treat a simulated casualty while under coordinated attack. But when her assigned shooter went down with a jammed weapon, the instructor shouted, "Pick it up, Corpsman." The Barrett was there. Not Hayes's, not even the same model, but the weight was unmistakable. She dropped prone, lined up on the target set 400 meters out, and made the shot. Clean. The instructors didn't comment. But when she handed the rifle back, one of them, a former sniper, his face weathered from deployments he'd never name, gave her a single nod. By the final month, 8 candidates remained. They'd been cut down not just by failure, but by attrition, injury, and the sheer grind of the course on the last day. They staged a full mission profile. The instructors played the role of an enemy force. The candidates had to infiltrate, rescue a simulated hostage, and extract under fire. The exercise ran for 18 hours straight, every muscle screaming, every decision carrying weight. Vasquez came out of it with 2 more blisters, a bruise the size of her fist on her thigh, and the top evaluation in her class for command presence under stress. Graduation was nothing like the movies. No speeches, no cheers, just a piece of paper, a handshake, and a new assignment. SEAL Team. 6. When she got back to her quarters that night, there was a package waiting. No return address. Inside, wrapped in brown paper, was a worn leather sling, the kind used on a Barrett rifle. A note in Kellerman's handwriting read, "Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates." She stared at it for a long time before slipping it into her locker. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. The healer and the warrior were no longer separate. They were her. Why did it feel like the air changed the moment she stepped into their team room? SEAL Team 6 wasn't like the others. Even the silence was different here. Heavier, sharper. Every man in the room had that same unspoken intensity, the kind that comes from surviving missions no one will ever acknowledge. They didn't look up at first. Operators were bent over gear, adjusting optics, checking comms, racking slides on sidearms when they finally glanced at her. It wasn't curiosity. It was measurement. She'd been here before. Different unit, different room. Same feeling, an outsider with everything to prove. Only this time, there was no warm-up period. The briefing began within minutes. The mission: intercept a high-value courier moving through a hostile district in Yemen. Intelligence suggested he carried encrypted data tied to an ongoing plot against U.S. forces. The challenge: the district was a labyrinth of narrow alleys, stacked rooftops, and choke points. A sniper's paradise. Vasquez's official role was medic. Unofficially, she knew why she was here. Word had traveled about Syria, about the Barrett, even if they didn't say it out loud. The mission profile hinted at a second layer. If things went wrong, they might need her to do more than treat wounds. The team leader, Commander Russell, outlined the plan with surgical precision. Fast insertion before dawn, capture or kill. Clean exfil before the district woke. We're not here to get into a gunfight. He finished, his eyes flicking briefly toward Vasquez. We're here to get in and get out. The insertion went flawlessly. They moved like ghosts through alleys no wider than their shoulders. Boots soft on worn stone. The smell of spice and diesel hung in the air, layered over the faint salt tang from the nearby harbor. Contact came sooner than expected. 2 men on a rooftop, armed with a case, startled mid-cigarette. One dropped. Other ran, and his shout carried farther than the report of the suppressed rifle that cut him down. In an instant, the district was awake. Gunfire rattled from 3 directions. Echoing between buildings, the team split into fire pairs, bounding forward toward the target building. Vasquez stayed tight behind Russell, scanning every shadow, every window. They reached the target, a squat, sun-bleached structure with a single reinforced door. Breach was clean. Inside, they found the courier, startled, reaching for a pistol that never cleared its holster. 2 operators secured him, while another ripped the satchel from his shoulder. That's when the first round cracked past Vasquez's ear. It wasn't random. It was aimed. Sniper. East. Someone shouted. The team dropped, taking cover inside the building. Russell moved to the nearest window, scanning. High ground, 2 o'clock. Balcony, beige facade. Vasquez followed his line of sight and saw it. The faint glint, the slight shift of a barrel. She felt her pulse slow in that strange way it always did when the world shrank to a target and a breathing cycle. "Russell," she said quietly, "he's locking this street. We move. He pins us. We stay. Reinforcements close." Russell's jaw tightened. "We've got no shot from here." Her eyes shifted to the weapon propped against the wall. The team's designated marksman rifle, heavier than the M4 South, lighter than a Barrett. Still, the principle was the same. Russell followed her gaze. "You up for it?" It wasn't a challenge. It was a reminder. This wasn't Syria, and there were no guarantees. She nodded once. "Give me 30 seconds. She moved to the window on the opposite side of the building, taking a longer, more concealed angle. The sniper was partially obscured by a crumbling parapet, but the line was there. She breathed, let her shoulder settle into the stock, adjusted for wind. Barely a whisper, but enough to shift a shot at this range. The trigger brake was smooth. The round caught him just below the scope, jerking him backward into shadow. "Snipers down," she called. The team moved instantly, splitting into two elements to cover the retreat. The streets blurred into a chaotic mix of shouts, scattered gunfire, and the pounding of boots. Vasquez kept pace, eyes sweeping for threats. Medic's kit slapping against her side. They reached the extraction point with seconds to spare before the first pursuing force rounded the corner. The Black Hawk's side guns opened up, cutting off the pursuit as the bird lifted them into the pale light of dawn. Only when they were clear of the district did Russell speak, voice even over the roar of the rotors. "Good shooting, Corman." It was the same tone Kellerman had used after Syria. Not effusive, not soft, but weighted with acknowledgement. Back at base, the debrief was quick. The data in the courier's satchel would go up the chain. The kill shot on the sniper was noted, only as enemy overwatch neutralized. But the glances in the team room told her the truth. They'd seen what she could do, and it was no longer in question whether she belonged here. Later that night, alone in her quarters, she sat on the edge of her bunk with the marksman rifle still in her hands. She thought about the moment before the shot, the same narrowing of the world, the same focus, the same certainty. It wasn't just skill. It was something deeper, a merging of the healer's precision and the warrior's resolve, and she knew, with a kind of cold clarity, that the line between them was never coming back. What happens when the mission and the oath you swore pull you in opposite directions? They were wheels up before dawn. The Black Hawk's interior red-lit and cramped, the smell of fuel mixing with the faint scent of gun oil. Commander Russell briefed them in clipped sentences over the thump of rotor blades. Target: a remote compound in the mountains of northern Somalia. Intelligence had flagged it as a meeting point for an emerging militant leader, one responsible for a string of attacks on aid convoys. The objective was simple on paper: secure the target alive for intelligence exploitation. The complication? The terrain was brutal, rocky ridgelines, narrow goat trails, and no friendly presence within 50 miles. If anything went wrong, the QRF would be hours away. Vasquez checked her kit automatically, her fingers brushing the edges of trauma dressings. Tourniquets, 4 lines. Her other hand rested on the sling of her rifle, the weight familiar now, almost comforting. They inserted low on the slope, moving under the cover of jagged rock formations toward the compound. The approach was uneventful, too uneventful. No sentries, no movement. The absence of noise in a place like this was its own warning. Russell signaled a halt just short of the outer wall. Morrison, on point, slid a fiber-optic camera under the gate. His hand froze. 2 down inside. Looks fresh. The breach was clean. The interior told a different story. 2 men, in mismatched fatigues, lay sprawled near the entrance, both with single gunshot wounds to the head. Beyond them, the courtyard was littered with the signs of a hurried evacuation. Overturned chairs, scattered papers, a kettle still steaming over a dying fire. They found the target in the main building, alive, barely. He was young, maybe mid-20s, and bleeding from a deep gash across his abdomen. His skin was pale, his breathing shallow. Beside him, an older man in traditional robes sat with his hands zip-tied, glaring at them with open hatred. Russell's voice was flat. Bag him. We'll get him stable enough for transport. Vasquez knelt beside the wounded man, assessing. Quickly, the cut was bad. But the real danger was the internal bleeding. Without intervention, he wouldn't survive the hour. She opened her kit. Russell's shadow fell over her. We don't have time for field surgery, Corman. Priority is extraction with the package. Her hands didn't stop moving. He's not making it to the bird without intervention. I need 20 minutes. You've got 5. She looked up, meeting his eyes. 5 minutes buys you a body bag. 20 gives you a live prisoner who can talk. The argument was unspoken but clear. Intel dies with him. Russell's jaw worked. Then he gave a sharp nod. You've got 15. After that, we're leaving whether you're done or not. She worked fast, every movement precise. Gloves on, wound packed, clamp. Applied. She could hear the team outside shifting positions, calling quiet updates over comms about movement in the hills. Whoever had left the compound was coming back, and not alone. She'd just tied off the last suture when Colin's voice came. Sharp overcomes, multiple contacts inbound, 30 plus, moving fast. Russell's tone hardened. That's it, Corman. We're moving. Vasquez secured the bandages, grabbed her rifle, and helped hoist the barely conscious target to his feet. They moved as a single organism, slipping back through the outer gate and into the rocky terrain beyond. The first rounds cracked off the ridgeline before they were 200 meters clear. The team dropped into cover, returning fire in short, controlled bursts. The wounded man sagged between 2 operators, his weight slowing them, but dropping him wasn't an option now. They bounded forward, leapfrogging positions, the volume of enemy fire increasing with each bound. Vasquez fired when she had to, but her attention kept flicking back to her patient. The hitch in his breathing, the way his head lolled forward. A round smacked into the rock just inches from her face. Spraying her with shards, she ducked, heart hammering, then rose again to return fire. The rhythm of it, sight picture, breath, trigger, felt as ingrained. Now, as starting in 4, they reached the extraction point under heavy fire. The Black Hawk's side gunners tore into the pursuing force, buying just enough time for the team to load the target and themselves aboard. Only once they were airborne did she let herself lean back, her gloves sticky with the man's blood, her arms aching from both the weight of the rifle and the patient. Back at base, the target was rushed to the secure medical wing. Within hours, intelligence confirmed he'd begun talking, confirming network nodes, weapons routes, names, Russell. Found her later, leaning in the doorway of the med bay. You bought us more than just a live prisoner today. You bought us the thread to unravel half their operation. She didn't answer right away. She was watching the steady rise and fall of the man's chest, the way the monitor beeped in rhythm with his pulse. Finally, she said, it wasn't about the intel. Russell studied her for a long moment. No, but you got it anyway. That night, alone in her quarters, she thought about the firefight, about the feel of his weight under her arm, about the decision she'd made in that courtyard. 15 minutes, not orders, not protocol. Just a choice, and the knowledge that next time, the cost of making it might be higher. When does saving a life become a liability? They were wheels up from Djibouti before midnight, bound for the coastal city of Bosaso. The target was a mid-level financier, a man whose money fueled the weapons routes they'd been tracking for months. He'd be at a private meeting in a fortified villa near the shoreline. The orders were clear: in and out before the target's security detail could react. No unnecessary engagement. Vasquez sat between Morrison and Collins in the dim light of the MH60, helmet resting against the bulkhead. She was running through casualty care sequences in her head. Habit, not premonition. When Russell tapped her shoulder, intel. Says he's got civilians in the compound, staff, maybe family. You're on standby in case things get complicated. Complicated. The polite word for the messy reality. She just nodded. The insertion was clean. They ghosted over the outer wall and swept through the lower level of the villa without a shot fired. The target was upstairs. 2 bodyguards posted outside a heavy door. They went down silently under suppressed fire, and within seconds, Russell had the financier cuffed and moving. They were halfway to the extraction point when the first scream cut through the night. Vasquez froze for half a beat. It wasn't fear. In that voice, it was pain. Sharp, raw. "Leave it," Russell ordered, pushing them forward. Not our mission. But as they passed a side hall, she saw her, a young woman, maybe 20, crumpled on the tile, blood pooled beneath her. Leg spreading fast, a severed artery by the look of it. Her boots slowed. Russell's voice snapped over Combs. "Vasquez now." She dropped to her knees beside the girl. "She's bleeding out," Russell stepped in. Frustration tightened his jaw. "We don't have time. We have the package, we move. She's got minutes," Vasquez shot back. "And I need 2 of them." It was the same gamble as Somalia, but this time they didn't have the lead on their pursuers. She heard Russell curse under his breath, then motioned to Collins. "Cover them." Her hands moved fast. Tourniquet. "Pressure dressing for?" The girl whimpered, clinging weakly to Vasquez's forearm. Outside, gunfire cracked. Morrison's voice came over Combs. Tense. Contacts. Moving fast from the north. 30 seconds. Russell barked. She cinched the tourniquet. Checked the pulse. Weak but present. Collins hauled her up by the vest. "Time's up, Doc." They moved. The girl slung between Vasquez and Collins. She was light. Shock stealing her strength. But every step slowed them. The gunfire grew closer, sharper. The extraction point was in sight when the first rounds tore into the sand around their boots. The team pivoted, returning fire. The Black Hawk flared in hard. Side gunners cutting swaths through the approaching force. They loaded the financier first, then the girl. Vasquez was the last to climb aboard. Russell dragging her in as the bird. Lifted under fire. Back at base, the financier was whisked away to a secure cell. The girl was taken to the field hospital. Vasquez stayed with her long enough to see the color return to her lips before heading to the debrief. Russell didn't. Speak until the room had emptied. "You want to explain to me why we almost lost the package?" His tone was even, but the edge was there. "She was dying," Vasquez said quietly. "She wasn't the mission," he countered. "Our orders. Orders don't erase an oath," she cut in. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the overhead lights. "You've been here long enough to know the calculus we work with," Russell said finally. "Sometimes we leave people behind. Sometimes we don't get to be the ones who save them." She met his gaze. Not this time. He held her stare for a long beat, then shook his head, half in exasperation, half in something else she couldn't name. "You keep walking that line, Corman. One day, it's going to break under you." That night, she lay on her bunk. Boots still on, staring at the ceiling. She thought about the girl's grip on her arm, the faint smile before they loaded her into the hospital stretcher. And she thought about the way Russell's voice had changed when the gunfire started closing. In the calculation in it, maybe he was right. Maybe the line was thinner than she wanted to believe. But she also knew this. When the choice came again, and it would, she'd make it the same way. How much of the past can you carry into the next fight before it starts to drag you under? The operation came down without warning. A high-priority grab in the interior of Mali. The target was a bomb maker, one whose devices had already killed more than a dozen coalition soldiers in the last month. Intelligence said he was hiding in a village on the edge of the desert. Surrounded by a small but loyal force, the plan was textbook. Insert in the darkness, breach the target's compound. Extract before the rest of the village could mobilize. But the air inside the briefing room was different tonight. Russell's tone was clipped. His eyes slid past Vasquez more than once without lingering. The tension had been building since Somalia and Basaso. 2 missions where she'd bent. Some would say broken. The line between orders and her own moral compass. The team hadn't said it outright, but she could feel it in the quiet shifts during kit prep, in the way Morrison's usual banter faded when she walked in. Even Collins, normally the first to have her back, had gone silent when Russell gave the med briefing. The insertion was clean, too clean. They moved through narrow streets lit only by moonlight, the sand under their boots muffling every step. The target compound was a low cluster of stone buildings at the village's edge. No sentries, no lights inside. They found the bomb maker exactly where Intel said he'd be, asleep in a back room. A pistol under his pillow, he was cuffed. And on his feet in under 20 seconds. They were halfway back to the extraction point when it happened. A figure darted out of a side alley, stumbling into their path. A boy, maybe 12, maybe younger. His face was streaked with dust and tears in the pale light. She saw the blood soaking through his shirt from a deep wound in his side. He looked right at her, not at Russell, not at the others, at her. "Doc," Collins started, but Russell's voice cut sharp over him. "Ignore it, move." Vasquez's. Boots stopped. "He's not going to make it 10 minutes. Russell's glare was immediate. "We have the package. We're under time. This is not the mission, I know." She finished for him, "And I'm not letting him die in the street." She was already moving, kneeling beside the boy, stripping off her gloves as her hands went to his wound. Russell's jaw flexed. 2 minutes, then we leave, with or without you." The boy's breathing was shallow. The wound was bad, jagged, dirty, and deep enough to have punctured something vital. Her hands moved fast, packing, sealing, stabilizing. She could hear the others shifting, uneasy. Then, in the distance, the sharp, rhythmic crack of rifle fire. Morrison's voice came over Combs. "Contact!" Multiple hostiles closing from the west. Russell didn't hesitate. "Move now." Vasquez ignored the order long enough to cinch the final bandage. She scooped the boy up, his small frame alarmingly light, and fell in behind Collins as they bounded toward the extraction point. The gunfire grew louder, closer. Rounds snapped past them, pinging off stone. The boy whimpered, burying his face into her vest. By the time they reached the LZ, the Black Hawk was already flaring in. The team piled in, Russell shoving the bomb maker toward the back. Vasquez climbed in last, the boy still in her arms. The side guns opened up as they lifted, cutting through the shapes darting in the alleys below. Back at base, the boy was rushed to the med bay. She stayed just long enough to confirm he was stable. Before heading to the debrief, Russell waited until the others had filed out. "Do you know what you just risked?" His voice was low, controlled, the kind of quiet that comes before the break. "I saved a kid's life," she said evenly. "You almost cost us the target. And if we'd lost him, how many more lives would his bombs have taken? You think about that?" She didn't look away. "Every day. And I still wouldn't have left him there." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Russell leaned in, voice barely above a whisper. "You keep making these calls, and one day, it won't just be your life on the line. It'll be theirs, all of them, and you'll have to live with that." That night, she couldn't sleep, not because of his words, but because somewhere deep down, she knew he was right, and that if the choice came again tomorrow, she'd still make it. And the way the team had looked at her on the walk back from the LZ told her something else. Trust, once cracked, doesn't always mend. What happens when the team isn't sure they can count on you, and the mission gives you no room for doubt? It was supposed to be a join-up with intelligence assets, a capture mission in the mountains along the Afghan-Pakistani border. The target was a senior facilitator in a network that had been arming insurgent factions for years. His convoy would be moving through a narrow pass at dawn, lightly guarded but impossible to hit again if they missed this window. The plan was tight, insertion overnight, position along the high ridgeline, intercept as the convoy came through, extract before the inevitable counterattack. From the moment she stepped into the team room, Vasquez could feel it, that thin, brittle edge in the air. She'd been with them long enough to read it. It wasn't nerves, it was caution. They'd all heard Russell's voice over comes in Mali. They'd all seen her step off the plan. In Somalia and Bosaso, now, with the most critical target they'd chased in months, the unspoken question sat between every glance. Would she follow the mission this time? The insertion went as planned, a silent climb through rocky gullies, the cold mountain air burning in their lungs. They reached their overwatch position just before first light, laying out in a loose arc above the narrow dirt road. Through her scope, she saw the dust trail first, then the vehicles. A lead truck, the target's SUV, and a trailing technical with a mounted gun. Russell's voice was low in her ear. Wait for my mark. One clean engagement, fast. They were 30 seconds from the mark when movement caught her eye. Low on the road, behind the lead truck. At first she thought it was debris. Then it shifted, and she saw the shape clearly. A man in civilian clothes, stumbling, hands bound behind his back. A rope leading from his wrists to the bumper of the truck ahead. His face was a mask of blood and dust. Her breath caught. Russell. We've got a hostage. Negative, came the reply. Eyes on the target vehicle. We'll deal with it later. Later he's dead, she said. Silence on the net. Then Russell, harder. Vasquez, stay on mission. She tracked the hostage through the scope. His gait was uneven, his knees buckling every few steps. The rope snapping taut as the truck pulled him forward. Another 50 meters, and the road narrowed between rock walls. Perfect for an ambush. Perfect for the kill zone. Her finger hovered over the trigger. She could hear her grandfather's voice again. The shot you don't take is sometimes the one you live with the longest. Russell's mark came over comes. Muzzle flashes lit the ridge. The lead truck's engine block erupted. The SUV swerved. The trailing technical opened up with its mounted gun, rounds shredding the rock near her position. She didn't fire it. The target, she fired at the rope. It snapped clean. The hostage collapsing into the dust. Russell's voice was a whip crack in her ear. God damn it, Vasquez. But there was no time for the argument. The kill zone dissolved into chaos. Operators moving downslope, the enemy scattering under fire. Vasquez broke from her position, sliding down toward the hostage. She reached him just as rounds chewed. The dirt around them, up close. He was worse off than she'd thought. Ribs visible under torn skin. One eye swollen shut. She got an arm under him, half dragging, half carrying him toward a boulder for cover. Above them, the rest of the team was pressing the assault. She heard Morrison call, "Target secure." Overcomes, followed by Collins marking the technical as destroyed. But now the counterattack was coming. Shouts and gunfire echoing from the ridgeline opposite. Russell appeared through the dust, jaw clenched, the target in tow and the rest of the team bounding in behind him. He didn't speak, just grabbed the hostage's other arm. Together, they hauled him toward the extraction point where the helicopter was already flaring in. The load was chaos, men shouting over the roar of rotors, a thud of incoming fire, the urgency of seconds slipping away. Vasquez shoved the hostage toward the flight medic, then turned to help drag the target aboard. They were airborne in less than a minute, the valley falling away below. Only when the noise settled into the steady thrum of the flight did Russell speak, leaning close so only she could hear. You disobeyed a direct order. She met his eyes, and he's alive because of it. For a long moment, his expression didn't change. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. You're hell on a chain of command, Corpsman, but I can't deny you do what you say you're going to do. Back at base. The hostage turned out to be an aid worker who'd been missing for weeks. His rescue made headlines the team would never get credit for. The target was in custody, the network disrupted. By the metrics that counted, the mission was a success. The after-action report noted the deviation from engagement protocol. but also credited rapid medical intervention for the hostage's survival. Russell's signature was at the bottom. That night, as the team sat in the dim light of the rec room, Collins raised a can of soda in her direction. "To Doc, the only one of us who can shoot you or save you, depending on what mood she's in." There was laughter, not forced, not polite. Russell didn't laugh, but when he caught her eye across the room, there was no anger left, just the understanding that she wasn't going to change. And maybe, in some places, that was the point. Later, alone in her quarters, she took the leather sling from her locker, the one Kellerman had sent after Syria. She ran her thumb over the worn surface, thinking about every choice. Every time she'd stepped off the path they'd marked for her, she thought about the faces. Rodriguez in Syria, the girl in Bosaso, the boy in Mali, the hostage in the mountains, all alive. All because she'd decided that sometimes the mission wasn't just the mission. Kellerman's words came back, quiet but certain. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. She smiled faintly, setting the sling back in its place. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.